certain energy would automatically manifest in the creature because of where he comes from war. But it's the exact opposite. If there's a monster in that room, it's not the creature from the moment of his inception. So I just want to hear about some of those choices.
Yes. Adapting this from beginning to end, it took solid 2.5 years of work. And the first step I do is my house my houses are libraries.
I've seen one room in one of these houses. During the pandemic, we were on a lot of Zooms together, and it was always like, what are you painting back there?
Yes.
What 50 books are you reading right now?
Yes.
Very cool stuff.
Because I think curiosity is the most interesting part of art. And so what I do is I have a huge library table, and what I do is I have my library cards, and I go through the whole house and I grab 50 to 80 books that are gonna be useful for the movie, and I put them on the table. And I don't watch movies. I already watched most Frankenstein movies. I don't want to consult them. I want to read. So I can be looking at Fuseli, the painter, or Caspar David Friedrich, the painter, or I can get the Shackleton photography of the house beard in the eyes, or I can be. I bought an 1835 entire library of medical science in London, and I read how things were being done sort of around that time. And the first thing I do is I pinpoint exactly the year. And this is a euchronism, which means that in this world, in the 1850s, she never published Frankenstein because she published it in 1818, and Byron and Shelley published, and it's a euchronism. This movie is not, and the reason I needed it, I wanted. She does one thing in the novel that is one of the neatest tricks ever done in a piece of literature. She never tells you how the creature is created. She tells you how it's assembled. He assembles it from parts, from dissection tables, and animals. He uses the tissue of animals, pigs, a slaughterhouse, tendons and bones, and because he wants to make it more than human. He wants it to be more than a human, and then he says, and I discovered the secret of life. He's a young student, Victor, in the novel. As I discovered the secret for life, and nobody else had ever seen it. And it was me, a humble man. It was so obvious. It was so perfect. It was so simple. And yet nobody had, and he never tells you what it is, ever. He mentions alchemy, and he's sort of treated badly because of alchemy. And I wanted to bring an alibi to the movie. So in terms of the science of it, I wanted to combine the lymphatic system, which would be of interest to Harlander because that's one of the dispersion systems for syphilis. Those tables exist, by the way. Those tables exist in the Hunterian Museum of London. There are 4, not 5. The 5th one I invented. And they were done by placing a cadaver on the table and removing tissue by tissue with a scalpel and gluing it with blood and lacquer. And until only the nervous system or only the circulatory system was left on the table. If you can, you will see a lot of things in the Hunterian Museum that are in the movie. The little Venus, that's in the Hunterian Museum. The half corpse that comes to life, that's in the Hunterian Museum. He doesn't come to life. What I do is I corner the alibi first. I said, okay, lymphatic system to this moment is a mystery. It's still a mystery. The vagus nerve, which is very much in vogue in in the almond latte community, yoga, Montana community of health, is something that is of great interest right now. And I read about science, and I've been obsessed. The other encyclopedia my father had was an encyclopedia of health and anatomy. So I became the youngest hypochondriac. At age 7, I would go to my mom and say, I have trichinosis of the brain. Wow. Mother, I have an imminent aneurysm. So all of my life, as a hypochondriac, I read everything I could about medicine. But then I said, okay, well, electricity doesn't quite figure like that. But galvanism was in vogue in the early 1800s, and demonstrations were made with mostly frog legs, later corpses, and so forth. And Mary Shelley was her household was very pro-science. When people say the novel is anti-science, it isn't. It is not. It's actually a spiritual novel in many ways, and it's trying to talk about the Promethean responsibility. You know, Prometheus creates life from clay, but also gives fire to humans. So it's both about the untimely passing of science or knowledge when it's not meant to be, but it's also about the creation of life and what it entitles. So I rounded up that with the galvanism. I needed to have a gasoline engine. It's 7 years too early, by the way. 7 years later, the French will make public the first oil engine, but there was experiments there. I had to determine what everything is made of. Silver is conductive, blah, blah, blah. So, it's before antiseptics. So I need to make Victor have huge pieces of ice, blah, blah. So each of these alibis, when exactly it happens, what war would it suit, the battlefield in the winter with frozen bodies, but frozen, I spend so much time in minutia. Once I get that, then where does it happen? You know, and I wanted to bring Scotland, which was of great importance to Mary Shelley's life and of great importance to medical science and revolution in medical science to Victorian England. In fact, they were rogues in Scotland. Of course, everybody knows about grave robbing in Scotland and all that, which became a plague, but they were also experimenting with very modern things. So all of that, once I do that, then I visually say, what is the visual frequency of this movie? And I determined it needed to be an opera. So I needed to showcase it, the grandeur, because otherwise the creature would look out of place. And when you make a movie, you're creating an audiovisual terrarium for the creature to look like, oh yeah, and there's the creature. There's the lab with Medusa's head, which is a misunderstood monster, which is killed by reflection, and then the theme, visually I'm gonna make it the mirror. The creature is a mirror of Victor, and Victor inflicts the pain. And I start making notes everywhere. Some of my pages are in the exhibit, you know, my annotations, and I spent 2.5 years. And until everything fits, I don't consider it done. So I don't know if I even answered a question.
You answered the question I asked, and then you answered like 5,000 other ones that I didn't. I'm good.
But it's five decades of thought into how to adapt this went into this. And some people say, well, but the father figure is not in the novel. It isn't, but it is in Mary Shelley's life. 100%. She had one of the most tense, unfair, unbalanced relationships with her father that you can find in any author, before or after. Of course, she like my mother's mother, and this is where biographies start to fuse too. My mother's mother died giving birth to my mother, and she became a legend. Mary's mother was a legend before she died. She was a precursor fighting for the place of woman in society. She went to the French Revolution, as I said, witnessed it, wrote about it, and she was probably the love of William's life, her father, Goodwin. And when Mary is born, there's a grudge to that. He teaches her to read in the gravestone of her mother, and they have a very tense relationship. She brings shame to the family by eloping with Percy. He's ashamed of them. He doesn't talk to them for ages, but he takes their money over and over and over again. And he's a very curious character. He also, the second publication of Frankenstein, 1823, is fueled purely by him, trying to make the first commercial tie-in with the theatrical production of Frankenstein, and he writes and says, I'm going to do a printing so you can sell it along with your play. And he prints 500 issues of that, of the 1823. But she dedicates 2 of her last novels to the figure of tyrannical fathers, and a very, very dark novel called Matilda in the middle, about an incestuous relationship between a daughter and a father. And she shows it to him, and he says, "You should never publish this." He puts it in a drawer, but doesn't destroy it. And she finds it in that drawer after his death and publishes it. So, that doesn't come from the novel, it comes from that. And my mother had miscarriages, so every time she would go to give birth to my other 2 siblings, I would wait, expecting her not to come back. And that's their miscarriages in Mary Shelley happen often. Of all her children, all of them died except the most boring one. The boring one survived.
Why is he the most boring one?
He was really boring. He was a proper gentleman, a very kind man. He had 0 interest in the arts, 0 interest in Bohemia. He was sort of a sportsman. It's like me giving birth to a banker.
We're assuming you guys all have interest in the arts.
It was a proper kind of, but all these things. How can you not? The difference between, if you take a novel that is a classic and you treat it like a classic, then what you have is taxidermy. You have a thing that is so hallowed that it shouldn't be alive. And my hope was, can I make people feel the way people felt 200 years ago? Can I make them renew their pact with that? And the only way I could do it is by shaking it a little, but staying true to what I think are the principles of the novel.
I want to talk about that, especially you mentioned the idea of approaching it as an opera, but you also used the phrase modernity. And I love that the film, it's very colorful.
Yes.
If someone is wearing something that's, one of the most crimson dyes, it looks like a very vibrant crimson in the film.
That is so nice you're saying that.
That typically hasn't been the way we've approached, like you said, these books or this material that we think is in the past, and so it has to have this reverential, almost stodgy approach to it. So speak as a director, your visual approach to the film.
Well, I'm so happy you asked that. And that was part of the era, and why. And, people think of Victorian era as a pastel color Downton Abbey thing. It was garish. It was garish, and it was modern. And they wanted colors, and they wanted things upon things upon things. And decorating was part of not only showing your wealth, but you could not be excessive in the way you approached it. In fact, that green and many of the greens in Victorian times were toxic. They were poisonous. Because in seeking the perfect tone, they used either arsenics or they used poisonous material to tint it. And there was a famous deadly wallpaper that if you find the original catalogs, you can still die by turning the page. So, but Victorian era, one of the things the movie wanted to do is, the subtitle of the novel is The Modern Prometheus. And I wanted everything Victor wears is period accurate, but we wanted to bring the bohemian of it, which is very, very close to London in the 1860s. You could see Victor crossing the street with the Rolling Stones. I wanted him to be like a rock star, like as Byron was in the early 1800s. So we flared his pants, we gave him a little bit of heel on the booth. He wears the broad brim hat sideways, and he moves like a rock star when he starts lecturing, when he's moving. I said to Oscar Isaac, more hips, because he needed to have the danger and the vehement behavior of an artist, but also the modernity. I wanted steam, I wanted dirt, I wanted carriages, I wanted multitudes, I wanted everybody dressed in beautiful, bright colors. So the 3 women in purple that cross the street when he's on the street, and I wanted the movie to feel 3 things: operatic, massive, and handmade. Very important. I wanted people to have an analog movie as much as possible, because it's our gift. Our gift to you is to say we made the entire fucking ship. We loomed every fabric the main characters do wear is loomed by us. It doesn't exist. We print, we embroider by hand. I commission and pay for every anatomical wax in Victor's lab. And they were handmade by a French artist in wax in the way they were made in the past. And I wanted to be lush and modern and alive in that way, that you felt the science was current, that you felt that the lifestyle was decadent. Harlander is sort of a nouveau riche in many ways, and he's excessive. And the way I find it very modern, one thing that is very much tech bros and us. He says he's looking for life, but he treats death with absolute disrespect. You know, so there's a lot of tech bro in Victor in a way, you know, in the way he says, well, I'm very interested in an app that creates art. No, you're interested in an app that fucks art to the ground. That's a very different position to be in.
Yes, it is. I want to talk about monsters, both the creature in this film and the monsters that have appeared in so much of your work. I'm thinking of The Shape of Water, I'm thinking of Devil's Backbone, and in this film, Jacob Elordi, who plays the creature, it's like one of the tenderest sort of depictions of this character that I think I've ever seen. And then Victor, on the contrary, is in some ways, as you just described, very monstrous. Talk about that dialectic, that dynamic.
You know, in the novel is an epistolary novel, as would be Dracula later. You know, Dracula is basically a collection of letters and documents and recordings and so forth that are assembled into a novel. And these are the letters from the captain to his sister. And in the perception of Victor in the novel, the captain first sees a saint, like a holy man, one of the most beautiful souls he's ever met. And I wanted to start like that, with him with the round window behind his head, almost like Jesus. You know, and then you realize he's not Jesus, he's Charles Manson. You know, you're listening to Charles Manson tell you the story, because I wanted very much to change that idea that the purpose of his quest is altruistic. He's trying, you know, the movie, in the color palette of the movie, which is very carefully laid out in pre-production, first by me and then handled by every department, I said the red will belong only to Victor and Elizabeth and the quest for life in the mother. That's it. And it's because he never gets over that. He stops growing when he loses his mother. You know, that's why he drinks milk all his life, but also why he is the type of guy that marries his mother. Everybody knows that guy. You don't want to go on a long road trip with that guy. And the color red is first established with the mother. His life as a child is very simple: black, white, and red. That's it. You know, that's the palette of his childhood, and that red continues through the film, in the batteries, in the archangel, in the gloves, in the battery, in the color of the batteries when they light up. And Elizabeth is the only one character that wears red and so forth. But Victor is the reflection of being 61 years old and realizing that for many decades I swore, as Dickens would, to paraphrase Dickens, I swore I was the hero of my own tale, and I realized I was my main antagonist. And I think that's the beauty of the novel, of the movie, is that you are following the antagonist, and that you find that out as the movie progresses. And the other thing I wanted to preserve with the creature, when Jacob came on board, I said, we're gonna have you study Buto, the Japanese technique that was invented after World War II, and it's about mainly the resurrection of the flesh. But it's also about going from a state of water to a state of fire in an instant. Because one of the things I like in the novel is the creature is capable of great violence. And so is this one. But the way I structured the screenplay, I said, let us open with a brutal scene and end the movie you understanding why it was brutal. That's a really beautiful arc. And there are calculations in the movie, in the adapting of the screenplay, there are calculations that are so beautiful, and it's a big relief when they work. One of them was the fact that the creature is born and Victor finishes his life. He doesn't know what follows. He never thought about it. So his quest ends the day the baby is born, which is true also of fatherhood. Everybody says, do you want a baby? That's not the question. Do you want a teenager? That's the real question. Do you want a 30-year-old that asks you for a loan? And you go, yeah, why not? But everybody wants a baby. But it's not a collectible or a Funko Pop. The little motherfucker's gonna grow. You know? And I think that's the thing. Victor, of course, wants to conquer that, but he's not interested in life. And yet, it's exactly the same moment the creature is interested in everything. They are irreconcilable positions. The birth of this innocence and the death of a quest. So that structurally allows for the creature to be born a baby, and to a baby. When a baby is unhappy, a baby has never been happy. You see how babies cry until they have no more noise, and you just see their tongue going.
I have a 6-month-old at home, so I know exactly what he's talking about.
So when a baby is unhappy, the baby has never known peace. When a baby is happy, he's never known pain. And those transitions were masterfully what we discussed with Jacob, and he masterfully did them. You know, and I think then the way I wrote the transitions was, he learns, you know, when you're a baby, you need 2 words, mama and papa, or papa and papa, or mama and mama, but you know, 2 forces that shape you. That's the world. That's all you understand. One feeds you, the other one holds you. One stops you, one gives you freedom. That's it. You 2 words. With more words comes pain. The more words we know, the more divided our notion of the world is. And then we need to know as many words as we can to explain the world. And that's the passage of the creature. The 3rd word he learns is friend. And then he starts to use the words in a way that is very eloquent, but is not, it evolves into being elegant. And writing those lines, there was a very delicate moment in the script where he has to go to Victor and speak. And Victor cannot, if he says something very melodic and beautiful, Victor would say, huh. But because he heard him say Victor and Elizabeth. So the next time he goes to him, I shot him in the throat. A hunter shot him in the throat. So he cannot quite speak as eloquently. So I need you to make one like me.
For a minute, I became a director. I'm like, you shot him in the throat? Damn.
Yeah, you. Take 3. No, but adapting that needed that, because if he comes in and says, pain is the token of our, it needs to be. So that is what he tries to grasp the notions, and that's in the novel. And I wanted that to be preserved, and it's shocking for people that only know the James Whale version is based on a play that was quite successful from 1927, and that takes Fritz, the hunchback assistant, from the earlier play in the 1820s. That's where it was in, but of course there is no abnormal brain, much less abnormal, which is that's a masterpiece of a movie. But everything people know from the 1931 play, it has very little to do with the novel other than the basic anecdote. And the fact that that movie is phenomenal for not only the genius of James Whale, but the clash of the genius of James Whale, who is an iconoclast and an acerbic intelligence, with the unending humanity of Boris Karloff. That clash, that beatitude and innocence and tenderness Boris brings, they were constantly at odds, Whale and Boris. So one of the things that are salient in the novel is how articulate the creature is.
I'm getting short on time. A quick question for you. It's a visual medium.
Are you guys okay if we go 10 minutes over? You know,
5 minutes.
Five? 5 more, my friend. 5 and 5. Are you okay? You give me the signal.
I was